Okay, so I want you to imagine for a moment that you are, let's say, a master architect.
Okay, an architect.
Right. And over a decade, you have built up this incredibly successful firm. You've got this signature style, your buildings totally define the skyline, and you've just completed the blueprints for what is guaranteed to be your most lucrative, celebrated skyscraper yet.
Like absolute peak of your career.
Exactly. The client is thrilled, your team is ready to go. And then you look at those perfect blueprints and you realize they look exactly like every single other building you've ever designed.
Oh, wow.
Yeah. So you calmly just, toss them in the fireplace, you watch them burn. Because you've suddenly realized that you aren't building a masterpiece anymore. You're basically building a prison of your own design.
I mean, that completely violates every instinct we have about, professional survival.
Oh, absolutely.
Because the human brain is just ruthlessly pragmatic. We are literally conditioned to find a pattern that gives us a reward and then just repeat that pattern until the day we die.
Right. Which is exactly why the story we are opening the studio vault to examine today is so completely anomalous. So welcome to today's deep dive. We are looking back at the year 1981, and we're specifically focusing on the creation, the recording process, and the massive cultural shockwave of the English rock band Genesis.
Specifically their 11th studio album, Abacab.
Yes, Abacab. And, okay, let's unpack this, because this is far more than just a retrospective on a piece of vinyl.
Definitely. What we're really unpacking here is it's basically a masterclass in the psychology of creative reinvention.
It really is.
It's this forensic look at a group of people who realized that the very tools that brought them worldwide fame were, about to become the weapons of their own obsolescence.
And that is the exact reason we wanted to dig into this today.
Yeah.
Because no matter what you do, whether you're, an artist trying to find a new voice or an executive trying to pivot a stagnant business, or honestly, just someone listening right now who feels stuck in a personal rut.
Right, it applies to anyone.
Exactly. The mechanics of how Abacab was made, they serve as a literal blueprint. It shows us what it actually takes to tear down your own ivory tower.
Yeah.
Burn your safety nets, and maybe even alienate the people who want you to stay exactly the way you are.
All just to secure your own future.
Yeah. So to really understand the sheer gravity of what they threw away, we kind of have to establish the stakes, right?
We do. Let's look at the cultural and musical landscape of the summer of 1980.
Okay, set the scene.
So Genesis, which at this point is the core trio of drummer and singer Phil Collins, keyboardist Tony Banks, and guitarist and bassist Mike Rutherford, they have just finished this grueling, massive tour across the UK and North America.
This was supporting their 10th album, Duke, right?
Exactly, Duke.
And, Duke was a monster of a record. It was their very first #1 album in the UK.
Huge success.
Yeah, they're playing massive arenas. They've got this expanded live band with Chester Thompson and Daryl Stuermer. They're essentially a massive, highly lucrative corporation at the absolute peak of their market capitalization.
But if you look at the wider market around them in 1980, the music industry was just undergoing this violent tectonic shift.
Oh, totally. The 1970s era of progressive rock,
Yeah.
which, Genesis helped pioneer with these long, complex, 20-minute mythological epics. It was culturally dying out.
It really was. Punk rock had already come in and basically kicked the doors down, and now we were seeing the rise of post-punk and new wave.
Right. You had bands like The Police, The Clash, Talking Heads.
Exactly. And they were completely dominating the conversation with music that was sharp, rhythmic, aggressive, and above all, lean.
Right, lean. So the progressive rock bands were suddenly being viewed as, the dinosaurs roaming the earth, just looking up at the new wave meteor.
That's a great way to put it.
So Genesis is at this really fascinating crossroads. They have immense wealth, they have a massive fan base, but they know their genre is aging rapidly.
And a typical band in this position, they take their Duke money, they book the absolute most expensive, luxurious recording studio in London or LA, and they just try to polish their old formula for one more cash grab.
Right. But they make this completely bizarre real estate decision instead.
They really do. In November 1980, they actually buy a property in Chiddingfold, Surrey, called Fisher Lane Farm.
And it wasn't just a house. It was a working farmhouse with an adjoining cowshed.
A literal cowshed.
A literal cowshed. And they decide, hey, we're going to convert this agricultural space into our own private recording studio.
But because the music industry timeline, waits for no one, they couldn't even wait for the studio to be finished.
Right, they had deadlines.
Yeah. So they start writing and rehearsing the new material in the farmhouse living room, literally while the control room is being built around them.
I mean, that physical displacement, that is the first crucial variable in this whole reinvention.
Absolutely. If we connect this to the bigger picture, we really have to examine how environment dictates psychological output.
Because before Fisher Lane Farm, Genesis operated the way almost all major artists did, right? They booked time in elite commercial recording facilities.
Exactly. And when you work in a commercial facility, you are acutely aware that the space does not belong to you.
The clock is kicking at like $1,000 an hour.
Right. And that financial pressure creates a very specific kind of creative conservatism.
Interesting. How so?
Well, think about it. If you are in a commercial studio and you start experimenting with a strange new time signature or maybe a weird synthesizer sound, and it isn't yielding immediate results after an hour or two, the guilt creeps in.
Oh, sure. The producer looks at his watch.
The band gets anxious. So what do? You abandon the experiment and you retreat to your safety net, the things you already know how to play perfectly.
Wow, yeah. It's like a massive corporate behemoth moving its top executives into like a scrappy startup garage.
That is a perfect analogy, because owning the farm meant they owned the clock.
The friction of that ticking meter was just gone. Like if a jam was going nowhere, they could just drop it, walk into the kitchen, make a cup of tea, and try something completely different an hour later without feeling like they were, setting money on fire.
And the isolation of that place was profound. I mean, this was the first Genesis album recorded entirely in England since A Trick of the Tail way back in 1976.
Wow, I didn't realize that.
Yeah, once the actual studio was wired and operational around March 1981, they just locked themselves in. They were working 12 to 14 hours a day, keeping that pace up for 14 consecutive weeks.
Which is an insane schedule. And that intense, unpressured isolation, it resulted in a massive surge of productivity.
It did. They actually generated enough high-quality, polished material for a double album.
And this is where the architect burning the blueprints comes back in. They looked at an entire hour of finished music, and they consciously, deliberately threw it in the trash.
They literally shelved it.
An hour of perfectly good material.
Why? Well, Mike Rutherford provided the exact psychological reasoning for this purge. He stated they were terrified of becoming a, quote, caricature of themselves.
Not caricature.
Yeah. They listened back to the tapes and realized, okay, this is good, but it sounds exactly like Genesis.
Which is such a brilliant realization, honestly. Because the moment you start sounding like a tribute band of yourself, you're finished.
You're creatively dead.
Exactly. So Tony Banks, who, historically was the architect of their most complex, grandiose musical structures, he actually institutes a ban on their own musical identity.
He laid out a literal list of Genesis cliches that were strictly forbidden in the farmhouse.
And the list is just fascinating because it targets the very pillars of their success.
Right. For instance, Banks banned the use of tambourines during choruses.
Which is like a classic, cheap way to artificially lift the energy of a track, right?
Exactly. It's a total crutch. He also banned extended, meandering solos. He banned those lengthy instrumental passages that basically only existed to demonstrate their technical virtuosity.
And the most shocking one to me, he banned complex melodies.
Which is wild coming from him.
Right. The guy who literally built his career on intricate classical-style keyboard compositions mandates that the melodies for this album had to remain simple.
He later admitted that Abacab was, by design, the least technical album they had ever made.
They were actively restraining their own talent. It's incredible.
Rutherford actually referred to this entire period as a fundamental rethink of their entire operating procedure.
Because to survive the 1980s, simple evolution wasn't enough.
No, they required a localized mass extinction event of their own habits.
But here's the thing. Banning the tambourine and writing in a cowshed, that only gets you so far. They realized pretty quickly that you cannot build a fundamentally new house using the exact same contractor you used for a decade.
Right. The personnel had to change.
Which leads to a really difficult professional break. They parted ways with David Henschel.
And Henschel had been their producer and engineer since 1975.
He was instrumental in crafting that lush, dense, classic Genesis sound. Firing the guy who essentially helped make you famous, that is a ruthless move.
But they needed a new sonic fingerprint. They had no choice.
So they bring in an engineer named Hugh Padgham. And this is a massive shift because for the first time in their entire career, Genesis decided to produce the album entirely on their own, with Padgham simply engineering the sessions.
Right.
But wait, I need to stop here and look really closely at the timeline, because the decision to bring in Hugh Padgham carries some incredibly heavy political baggage within the band.
It really does, because Padgham wasn't just, pulled out of a hat.
Right.
He was chosen because he had recently engineered Peter Gabriel's third solo album, and Gabriel, of course, being the former lead singer of Genesis.
And Phil Collins played drums on that record.
Exactly. And furthermore, Padgham had just finished engineering Phil Collins' debut solo album, Face Value.
Okay, so this is where I really have to push back on the standard narrative of this band. The timing here is just explosive.
Oh, absolutely.
Phil Collins isn't just the drummer anymore. He took over lead vocals years ago, and now, right before the Abacab sessions begin, he drops Face Value.
And that wasn't just a solo record.
No, it was a cultural monolith. I mean, In the Air Tonight is dominating the planet.
Everywhere you went, you heard it.
Right. Collins is suddenly a massive global superstar in his own right.
Yeah.
So he walks back into this freezing farmhouse in Surrey, and he's bringing his personal engineer with him.
I see where you're going with this.
There is absolutely no way the power dynamic in that room didn't violently shift. You can't tell me Collins didn't walk in, flex his new superstar muscles, and say, guys, we're doing things my way now.
I mean, it is the most logical assumption you could make, truly.
Right.
Because when a frontman has a solo hit that completely eclipses the band, it usually destroys the band. It's a tale as old as time.
Exactly.
But the historical record, which is backed by multiple sources and interviews from all the other members, actually contradicts that expectation. Yeah. Tony Banks has explicitly stated on the record that the success of Face Value did not alter their personal relationships, and it didn't create this massive ego clash.
I find that so hard to believe. Just human nature dictates there would be some resentment there.
Well, the mitigating factor was their shared history. You have to remember, these men were school friends.
Oh, right. Charterhouse.
Right. They had been in the trenches together long before any of them had a dime. So the interpersonal hierarchy was so deeply entrenched that outside commercial success couldn't easily fracture it.
Okay, fair enough.
However, while Face Value didn't destroy their friendship, your instinct is completely correct regarding the sonic power dynamic.
I knew it.
Yeah, Collins' solo work absolutely hijacked the sonic landscape of Abacab.
Okay, so how did that manifest practically in the studio?
It came down to a very specific, revolutionary recording technique that Padgham and Collins had sort of stumbled upon during those Peter Gabriel sessions.
The famous drum sound.
Yes. It's a technique that would go on to basically define the sound of the 1980s gated reverb.
Gated reverb. Man, if you grew up in the 80s,
Yeah.
that term is practically a trigger word. It was everywhere.
It was inescapable.
But for a listener who, isn't steeped in audio engineering, what are the actual physics of gated reverb? Like, why did it become the holy grail for Genesis?
Okay, to really grasp it, we have to look at the mechanics of sound.
Walk me through it.
When you hit a drum in a large reflective room, think of like a big stone chamber, the sound waves bounce off the walls and create reverberation.
Right, that massive, echoey stadium rock sound.
Exactly. And normally, in nature, that reverb tail decays gradually over several seconds. It slowly fades out.
Like an echo just drifting away.
Right. What Hugh Padgham did, specifically on the track Intruder from Peter Gabriel's album, was take that massive room sound, compress it so it was aggressively loud, and then run it through an electronic noise gate.
Okay, a gate, which literally opens and shuts based on volume, right?
Exactly. The noise gate is programmed to instantly mute the microphone channel the exact millisecond the volume drops below a specific threshold.
Oh.
So instead of a natural fading echo, you get this gigantic explosive crack of a drum that is abruptly sucked into a total vacuum.
Boom! And then just snap. Total silence.
Yes. It completely defies the physics of acoustic space. It sounds huge, but incredibly tight and synthetic at the same time.
And when Banks and Rutherford heard what Padgham and Collins achieved on that track, they must have just lost their minds.
They realized immediately that this was the sound of the future. They wanted that exact violent percussive power on Abacab.
But implementing gated reverb wasn't just a matter of, flipping a switch on the mixing board, was it?
No, not at all. What's fascinating here is that elevating the drums to be the absolute dominant force in the mix fundamentally altered how everyone else had to play their instruments.
Right. Because an audio mix is basically a finite box. You only have so many frequencies available.
Exactly.
If the drums are suddenly taking up all the low end, the mid-range punch, and the high-end snap, There's literally no physical room left for anyone else.
Which brings us right back to Tony Banks and his list of cliches. Historically, Banks was famous for playing what are called block chords.
Okay, let's break that down for the listener. What is a block chord in this context?
Imagine a keyboardist holding down thick, dense, complex chords using all 10 fingers, spanning multiple octaves.
Very symphonic.
Very. It creates this lush symphonic wash of sound. But in audio engineering terms, a block chord eats up almost the entire frequency spectrum.
It's like pouring thick concrete over the whole mix.
Yes. And if you pour concrete, the drums can't punch through, they just sound muffled and weak.
So to allow Collins's gated reverb drums to sound as massive as possible, Banks had to radically alter his entire playing philosophy.
He had to stop playing block chords entirely.
He had to play lean, sparse, staccato notes. He literally had to leave physical air in the arrangement.
It's the ultimate example of addition by subtraction. By forcing the keyboardist to play less, the entire band suddenly sounded heavier and more aggressive.
And there's another really serendipitous detail about Hugh Padgham's involvement here, too. I mean, he was a pioneer with microphones and drum sounds, obviously.
Right.
But he admittedly knew very little about synthesizers or how to record keyboards.
Which, ironically, was exactly what Banks needed.
How so?
Because if they had used a traditional prog rock producer, that producer would have had preconceived notions of what a Tony Banks keyboard should sound like.
Ah, they would have steered him toward the classic piano and mellotron sounds from the 70s.
Exactly. Padgham's ignorance of the instrument actually gave Banks total immunity from his own past.
It allowed him to treat the synthesizer not as a piano, but as a literal noise machine.
He started relying really heavily on the Prophet 5 analog synthesizer. He was pulling up these bizarre, harsh, synthetic tones that, honestly, he would have previously dismissed as too ugly for a Genesis record.
So the stage is completely set. You have an isolated farmhouse. You have an engineer armed with a revolutionary, aggressive drum sound.
You have a keyboardist intentionally stripping away his symphonic tendencies to leave space.
And you have a unified mandate to just destroy their own musical history. I mean, the music they began laying down under these conditions was utterly alien to anything a 1970s Genesis fan would recognize.
It really was. So let's actually look at what this philosophy produced.
Okay, let's get into the tracks. The album ultimately contains 9 tracks, right?
Right. 6 of them are group written, born out of those unstructured living room jams, and 3 are solo compositions.
Let's see. Banks wrote Me and Sarah Jane. Collins contributed Man on the Corner, and Rutherford brought in Like It or Not.
But the true architecture of the reinvention is really found in the collaborative tracks.
And we absolutely have to start with the title track, Abacab. Even just saying the word, it sounds like an incantation or something. How did that actually become the title?
The origin is almost comically analytical, to be honest.
Oh, really?
Yeah. The song was born from a jam session, played over a looped electronic drum pattern. And as they began piecing the improvisation into distinct musical sections, they just used standard musical notation to label the parts. Section A, Section B, Section C.
Oh, very clinical.
Very. And at a certain point in the arranging process, the structure of the song literally followed the sequence A, B, A, C, A, B.
Oh, my God.
Yeah, the name was literally just a placeholder that stuck.
But the philosophy behind that title is what fascinates me.
Mm-hmm.
You name your flagship song Abacab. You are basically advertising this rigid, mathematical, grid-like structure.
Right.
But Mike Rutherford later revealed that the song kept mutating. By the time they finished recording it, the structure wasn't A-B-A-C-A-B anymore.
No, not at all.
He joked that the final track was actually arranged something like a cabac.
Exactly. They kept the rigid title for a song that essentially devolved into structural chaos. It's a subtle mockery of the very idea of strict composition.
It sets the tone perfectly. It's like they're saying, you think you know what the rules are, but we've already changed them.
And if the title track was a structural misdirection, track 2 on the album was a literal cultural hand grenade.
We absolutely need to talk about No Reply at All.
This is the moment where the traditional progressive rock purists likely check the album sleeve to make sure the record store hadn't, put the wrong vinyl in the jacket.
Oh, without a doubt. Because No Reply at All is not a rock song. It is a straight-up, unapologetic R&B track, and it prominently features the Phoenix horns.
The horn section from Earth, Wind, and Fire.
I just need the listener to stop and think about the cognitive dissonance of that for a second. Genesis, the English boarding school band, They used to wear literal costumes and sing 20-minute suites about the Greek mythological figure Hermaphroditus decides to hire the funkiest, tightest American soul horn section on the planet.
It's unbelievable.
That is a recipe for a catastrophic identity crisis. How did the record label not intervene and shut this down immediately?
Well, the label was kept entirely in the dark because of the farmhouse isolation. Genesis didn't have A&R executives breathing down their necks checking on their progress.
Oh, right. The bunker mentality.
Exactly. The decision to use the horns happened completely organically, and it was spurred again by Phil Collins's solo experience.
Because he used them on his album.
Right. He had utilized the Phoenix horns on face value to incredible effect.
So they were working on no reply at all
Yeah.
and trying to figure out the arrangement.
And initially, they were trying to emulate a brassy staccato sound using Tony Banks's synthesizers, sort of like something they had attempted on the Duke album.
Right.
But Collins looked at the limitation of the synthesizer and basically said, instead of faking a horn section, why don't I just call the best horn section in the world?
And I love that Banks actually pushed back on this initially. The sources note he had deep reservations about bringing in session musicians.
Because outside of a string section on their 1969 debut album, Genesis basically never used outside players on their studio records.
It violated the sanctity of the band in a way.
It did. But Collins's motivation wasn't just about getting a good sound. He stated very clearly that his goal with the horns was to, quote, suddenly jar people and take them off automatic pilot.
Here's where it gets really interesting.
Right. He was fully aware of the listener's expectations. He wanted to weaponize the Phoenix horns to violently shatter the Genesis stereotype within the first few minutes of the album.
He went even further than that. Collins admitted his specific songwriting ambition for No Reply at All was to write a track that the Jackson 5 would want to record.
Which is insane.
The sheer audacity to pivot from progressive rock to aiming for a Motown standard is breathtaking. And against all odds, Banks relented, the horns were recorded, and Banks eventually admitted it became one of his favorite tracks on the record.
And this rhythm-first, expectation-shattering philosophy, it didn't just change their instrumentation. It completely altered how they approached the very foundation of a song. You see this clearly on the track, Keep It Dark.
Well, Keep It Dark is brilliant because it sounds so sparse and mechanical.
It was built entirely around a drum loop. They literally recorded 2 bars of a complex drum pattern, physically looped the tape, and then forced themselves to write and play the entire song over that repetitive, unchanging foundation.
It is an incredibly modern, almost hip-hop approach to constructing a backing track.
Very much so.
But while the music is mechanical, the lyrics are what really catch my attention. Tony Banks wrote the words, and it's a narrative about a man who was abducted by aliens.
Right.
He is taken to this surreal, vibrant, entirely peaceful alien planet. But when the aliens return him to Earth, he makes a conscious decision to refuse to tell anyone about where he's been.
He just goes back to his normal life.
Yeah, he just goes back to his mundane life and keeps his mouth shut because he knows that human beings would never believe him and they would probably just lock him up.
And the working title for the song was simply Odd.
And it is odd. But I can't help but extrapolate a really deep psychological metaphor here. Look at what is happening to these 3 men at the time.
Okay, I'm listening.
They are isolated in this farmhouse in Surrey. They are completely cut off from the music industry, the press, and the heavy expectations of their fans. And in that isolation, they are discovering this vibrant, weird, entirely new sonic world of drum loops, gated reverb, and R&B horns.
They're experiencing total creative freedom.
Exactly. But they also know that eventually they have to leave the farm. They have to present this bizarre new world to the public. And there's a very real fear that the critics and the old fans won't understand it, won't believe in it, and will just reject it outright.
Oh, wow.
Keep It Dark feels like a subconscious manifestation of their own anxiety about leaving their creative isolation.
That is a very astute psychological reading of the text, because they were cultivating a reality that only the 3 of them understood.
Right.
And while side 1 of the album challenged the audience with funk horns and pop structures, side 2 is where the farmhouse fever dream truly took over.
They pushed the absolute limits of their improvisational freedom here.
They did, often leaning straight into the absurd.
We are definitely getting into the deep cuts now, and this is where the rejection of their past becomes almost actively hostile. Let's look at Doda Lurker.
Okay, yes.
It's a 2-part suite. The music is heavy and driving, but the lyrics in the Lurker section are literally constructed as a puzzle. It's a riddle written by Tony Banks.
And you really have to remember the context of the Genesis fan base here.
Oh, they were intense.
Progressive rock fans were highly analytical. They were used to dissecting Peter Gabriel's old lyrics for literary references, mythological allegories, and hidden meanings.
Right, they treated Genesis albums like collegiate literature assignments. So Banks presents them with this lyrical riddle, and for years, decades, even the fan base operates like an absolute frantic hive mind.
Trying to solve it.
Yeah. They're writing in fanzines, playing the vinyl backwards, analyzing the syntax, trying to decode the deep, profound meaning of the lurker.
But the irony, of course, was finally revealed in 1997.
Tell them what he said.
During an interview, Banks was finally pressed to reveal the definitive solution to the riddle, and his response completely deflated 30 years of fan theory.
He stated that there was no real solution.
Exactly. He didn't have a specific, profound idea in mind when he wrote it. It was essentially a prank.
It's so funny. He constructed a musical escape room that didn't actually have a key. It is the ultimate subversion of the prog rock trope. He used the aesthetics of deep, meaningful poetry to deliver a joke.
Although, to be perfectly accurate regarding the source material, the fans weren't entirely chasing ghosts.
What do you mean?
Well, early sessions at the farm saw Dodal Lurker connected to 2 other tracks that were eventually cut from the album and released as B-sides.
Oh, Namananu and Submarine.
Right. And because of the title Submarine, the prevailing fan theory that the riddle involved a submarine or some sort of sea creature wasn't completely baseless.
Okay, that makes sense.
But Banks's admission that the riddle itself wasn't rigorously designed to be solved, it just shows how loose and irreverent they had become.
Irreverent is the perfect word. Because if Doodle Lurker was a lyrical joke on the audience, the next track we need to examine, Who Done It, was basically a physical assault on their eardrums.
Who Done It remains arguably the most divisive, polarizing piece of music in the entire Genesis catalog.
Oh, easily.
Banks himself has diplomatically referred to it as a real one-off piece.
I would call it a 3-minute panic attack. I mean, it doesn't sound like Genesis. It barely sounds like music.
It is aggressive.
It is built entirely around this distorted, highly repetitive synthesizer groove that just grates on your nerves.
And the mechanics of how that sound was generated are crucial to understanding the song. Banks was utilizing the Prophet 5 analog synthesizer.
Right.
Unlike modern digital keyboards where you just select a perfect static preset, the Prophet 5 relied on physical voltage and manual knobs to shape the sound wave.
So it was unpredictable.
Highly unpredictable. What Banks did during the recording of Who Done It was manually twist and warp the preset knobs while he was playing the notes.
So the actual texture, pitch, and tone of the instrument are violently glitching and degrading in real time.
Exactly. It's impossible to replicate perfectly because it relies on the physical chaos of his hands on the console.
And this track wasn't carefully composed either, was it?
No, it was the result of a 30-minute, entirely unstructured group improvisation in the living room.
They found this ugly, abrasive groove, jammed on it for half an hour, and then ruthlessly edited the tape down to a concise 3-minute track.
Over which Phil Collins just chants this maddeningly repetitive robotic lyric. Was it you, or was it me, or was it he, or was it she?
It's so weird, and Hugh Padgham actively encouraged this chaos.
He did. He specifically engineered the drums on this track to sound offensive.
Offensive.
Yeah, he wanted them incredibly loud, harsh, and completely antithetical to the polite, carefully balanced drum mixes of the 1970s.
It is pure synth-punk energy. In fact, it was so wild that when they eventually took Abacab on tour, Mike Rutherford would literally put down his bass guitar, walk over to a second drum kit, and play drums alongside Chester Thompson, just to make the live version of Who Done It sound even more chaotic and tribal.
He was a spectacle.
But this brings up a massive structural question about the music industry at the time. You have a track that is this weird, this abrasive, and deliberately designed to alienate the listener.
Right.
Usually, when a band hands an album to the record label, the executives act as the quality control. They smooth out the rough edges. You would assume the label heard Who Done It
Right.
and demanded it be cut from the record immediately. But the exact opposite happened, didn't it?
It did. This raises an important question. The inclusion of Who Done It wasn't just a band decision. It was championed by the very top of the corporate ladder.
But really?
When the track list was being debated, it was Amit Ertegun, the legendary president of Atlantic Records, who specifically demanded that Who Done It make the final cut.
Amit Ertegun, the man who signed Ray Charles, Aretha Franklin, and Led Zeppelin.
The very same.
A music industry titan with arguably the greatest ear of the 20th century. hears this glitchy, chaotic synth jam and says, that absolutely must go on the record.
Yeah.
Why? Why would a major label president protect the most anti-commercial track on the album?
Because Erdogan understood the cultural trajectory of 1981 better than almost anyone.
Okay, unpack that.
We were at the precipice of a massive shift. MTV was launching. The aesthetics of new wave, synth pop, and post-punk were completely dominating the underground, and they were bleeding into the mainstream.
Right.
Erdogan recognized that what sounded abrasive or anti-commercial to a 1974 rock fan actually sounded exactly like the future to a 1981 teenager.
Oh, that makes total sense.
All right.
Being slightly annoying, using robotic synthesizers, chanting repetitive lyrics. That wasn't commercial suicide. It was cutting-edge credibility.
Exactly. The label was so convinced of its modern appeal that they actually considered releasing Whodunit as a commercial single. It perfectly encapsulated the band's willingness to demolish their old identity.
But, an auditory reinvention isn't enough. If you are going to burn down the house, you can't just change the music. You have to completely change the visual aesthetic, too.
You have to signal the change.
Right. The album cover had to signal to the world that the old Genesis was dead before they even put the vinyl on the turntable.
Which leads us to the physical packaging of Abacab. And the story of the album cover perfectly mirrors the chaotic creation of the music itself.
It really does. So the band hired a prominent English artist and designer named Bill Smith to conceptualize the artwork.
And Smith basically walked into a buzzsaw because the band was in a highly reactive state at this point.
Oh, yeah. Smith later recalled that the band was notoriously difficult to collaborate with during this period. His exact assessment was that, quote, they only ever knew what they didn't like.
Which is a classic symptom of an artist in the middle of a major transition. Yeah, they had successfully identified what they were running away from. They knew they didn't want any more gatefold paintings of wizards, mythical landscapes, or surrealist prog rock imagery.
Right, no more hobbits.
But they hadn't yet articulated a clear vision of what their new visual language should actually be.
So Smith comes into the meeting. He brings portfolios filled with polished, beautiful artwork from various professional illustrators. He presents these elaborate concepts to the band.
And they hate them.
They just stare at them and reject everything. Too old, too prog, too fussy. They are completely unsatisfied. But then, almost by accident, Mike Rutherford happens to be flipping through Bill Smith's own personal rough sketchbook.
A sketchbook containing just discarded ideas and unfinished concepts.
Right. And Rutherford stops on this one specific, completely abstract sketch. He points to it and says, that is the album cover.
And it wasn't a painting or an illustration.
No, it was literally just torn, inch-long scraps of paper ripped from a Pantone color swatch book, arranged totally randomly with some squiggly black lines drawn over them.
It literally looked like the debris you would sweep up off a graphic designer's floor.
Yes. Smith explained that the design wasn't even intended for an album. He had originally mocked it up as a concept for a book cover.
But Rutherford saw the jagged, sharp, completely abstract nature of the torn paper and realized it perfectly represented the jagged, sharp, fragmented music they had just recorded in the farmhouse.
It is abstract modernism.
Yeah.
It is a complete and utter rejection of narrative art. And Smith ended up taking that torn paper design and reproducing it in 4 different distinct color schemes.
And the record label actually printed and distributed all 4 variants of the cover simultaneously.
It was a stroke of marketing genius. When you walked into a record shop in September 1981, the displays for Abacab looked incredibly dynamic and modern, with these sharp geometric shapes and different neon and pastel color.
It really stood out.
But I want to pause and appreciate the sheer corporate panic this must have caused. Imagine Bill Smith walking into the offices of Charisma Records and Tony Smith, the band's formidable manager, and having to confidently explain that the highly anticipated new album cover for one of the biggest rock bands on the planet is going to be tiny scraps of colored paper.
Oh, the executives must have been terrified.
Terrified. But Genesis held all the leverage. They backed Smith. And ironically, Smith later revealed it was the best paid job of his entire career.
And the band even allowed him to retain the copyright to the artwork, which is incredibly rare.
It was a visual declaration of independence, and they extended this philosophy to the interior of the packaging as well. Because if you bought Abacab in 1981 and eagerly opened the sleeve to read the lyrics, you would find nothing.
The lyrics were entirely absent.
For a band like Genesis, whose entire early reputation was built on incredibly dense, narrative-driven lyrics that fans analyzed like poetry, hiding the words was a profound statement.
It really was. Tony Banks explicitly provided the rationale for this decision. He felt that on their previous albums, the audience placed far too much emphasis on the written word.
They were treating the album like a book with a soundtrack.
Exactly. Banks wanted to force the listener to experience the vocals differently. By removing the lyric sheet, he was demanding that the audience absorb Phil Collins's voice purely as part of the overall sonic texture.
Like an instrument.
Yes. He wanted the voice to be felt as an instrument, interacting with the gated snare drum and the Prophet 5 synthesizer, rather than being intellectualized as a piece of literature.
It's aggressive, forced re-education of your own fan base. And they didn't stop at the album packaging.
No, they didn't.
If they were going to redefine their sound and their album art, they had to revolutionize how they presented themselves on stage. This brings us to the 1981 Abacab tour of North America and Europe,
Which featured a technological debut that would literally change the live music industry forever.
We are talking about the Very Light automated lighting system.
The Very Light.
And Genesis didn't just use this system, they practically bankrolled it. They invested $1 million of their own money to help a company in Texas develop and manufacture the Very Light system.
$1 million.
$1 million in 1981. That is a staggering, almost reckless amount of capital for a band to sink into stage lights.
It sounds reckless until you connect it to the core philosophy of this entire era.
Okay, lay it out.
Look at the macro pattern. Why did they buy Fisher Lane Farm? Because they wanted total, uncompromising control over the recording environment.
Right.
The investment in Very Light is the exact same drive for autonomy, but applied to the live arena. Because before 1981, stage lighting was slow, cumbersome, and manual.
If you wanted a light to change color, a crew member often had to physically climb the scaffolding and place a colored gel over the lamp.
It was highly theatrical, but it was incredibly static.
The Very Light system was revolutionary because it was fully automated and computerized. A single lighting operator at a console could instantly change the color, intensity, and physical direction of hundreds of lights in a fraction of a second.
Now, think about how that pairs with the music of Abacab. They have this new, sharp staccato sound. They have gated reverb drums that snap like a gunshot.
Old, slow theater lights wouldn't work with Whodunit or No Reply at all.
Exactly. They needed a lighting rig that was as fast, aggressive, and modern as the synthesizers they were playing. The Very Light allowed the physical environment of the arena to pulse and twitch in perfect synchronization with the drum machine.
It is the ultimate example of vertical integration by a rock band. In the span of a single year, Genesis took total control of their real estate, their engineering process, their album artwork, and their live visual technology.
They built a complete, self-sustaining ecosystem designed to project their new identity into the 1980s on their exact terms.
So we have the complete picture of the gamble now. They fired the producer who defined their classic era. They banned their own signature musical techniques. They stripped away the lush keyboards to make room for a revolutionary, aggressive drum sound.
They brought in a funk horn section.
They wrote songs over looped drum machines and live glitch synthesizers. They slapped ripped paper on the cover, deleted the lyric sheet, and spent $1 million on robot lights.
It's an insane pivot.
This wasn't just a pivot. It was an existential bet on their own relevance. If this failed, they weren't just going to have a flop, they were going to be a laughing stock.
Completely.
So what does this all mean? The ultimate question is, when the dust settled, did this massive coordinated act of self-sabotage actually pay off?
Well, the verdict is historically undeniable. It proves that calculated aggressive risk can yield unprecedented rewards. Abacab was released in September 1981, and commercially it was an absolute juggernaut.
It immediately became their second consecutive #1 album in the UK.
But the real victory was in America. Abacab became their very first album to crack the top 10 on the US Billboard 200, peaking at number 7.
Wow.
It sustained massive momentum and was eventually certified double platinum by the RIAA, representing over 2 million copies sold in the United States alone.
The audience didn't just accept the reinvention, they bought into it by the millions.
It really did.
The commercial numbers are bulletproof. But how did the music press the critics, who basically form the cultural consensus, react to a prog rock band suddenly playing R&B and synth punk?
The critical reception at the time was a fascinating psychological split. It leaned mostly positive, but the reviews often revealed more about the critics' own biases than the album itself.
Oh, give me an example.
For example, look at Paul Colbert's review in Melody Maker. He called the album wildly inconsistent. He actually praised the band's courage on the weird tracks, calling Keep It Dark and Who Done It the most exciting, challenging music they had made in years.
But he had issues with the rest of it.
Yes. He referred to parts of the title track, Abacab, as Frankensteins.
Frankensteins.
Yeah, he felt that without the strict classical composition style of the 1970s, the new jams felt unstructured, like disparate body parts stitched together without a soul.
Which is, honestly, a totally fair critique. If you are a purist judging them against the intricate suites of 1974, a song built out of a loop drum jam is a Frankenstein.
But that was the entire point of the Farmhouse Experiment.
Exactly.
And on the other end of the spectrum, you had David Frick reviewing the album for Rolling Stone. Frick completely understood the cultural assignment.
What did he say?
He vehemently praised Genesis for actively dismantling their, quote, ivory tower artistry. He celebrated the sparse arrangements and the highly rhythmic interplay. Crucially, Frick compared the energy of Abacab to cutting-edge contemporary acts like XTC and The Police.
I mean, comparing a decade-old prog band to The Police in 1981 is the holy grail of music criticism. It means you aren't just surviving. You are currently relevant. You are part of the modern conversation.
And if we look at the album through the lens of modern retrospective criticism, Stephen Thomas Erlewine's assessment for all music synthesizes it perfectly.
Okay.
He notes that while Duke hinted at a new direction, Abacab was the crucible where this new incarnation of the band was forged. He ultimately classifies the album as truly modern art rock.
It's the perfect summation of the gamble. The reviewers and the hardcore fans who were deeply emotionally invested in the 1970s era felt betrayed. They saw the torn paper and heard the earth, wind, and fire horns and felt like their favorite band had literally died.
It was a mourning process for some of them.
But Genesis proved a very difficult, very cold truth about longevity in any industry.
Yeah.
Sometimes, alienating a small vocal percentage of your legacy base is the exact necessary price you must pay to open the door to millions of new people.
Oh, without a doubt. If they had stayed in a commercial studio, if they had retained Laban Henschel, if Tony Banks had stubbornly continued to play his dense block chords to keep the purists happy, they would have safely delivered Duke Part 2.
And it would have sold well to the established fan base.
It would have. But it would have marked the beginning of their slow, inevitable decline into a nostalgia act. Instead, by burning the blueprints, they transformed themselves into one of the most dominant musical forces of the entire 1980s.
It is a staggering journey. They walked into a freezing cowshed in Surrey with a pile of musical habits, ruthlessly executed their own cliches, and walked out with a double platinum template for survival.
An incredible story.
It really is. And as we close the vault on this deep dive, I want to take this out of 1981 and apply it directly to you, the person listening right now.
Yes, think about this.
Think about the central metaphor of this entire story. That hour of perfectly good, polished material that Genesis threw in the trash. What is the equivalent of that hour of music in your own life?
In your career or your daily routines.
Your creative projects. What are your
Right.
block chords? What is the dense, complicated thing you do every single day because you're good at it, but it might actually be smothering the space you need to grow?
That's a great way to frame it.
What are the tambourines you rely on? The cheap, easy tricks that get a quick result but keep you from innovating. You know these habits work. They pay the bills. They are incredibly comfortable. But are they actually serving your future, or are you just slowly, comfortably becoming a caricature of yourself?
We operate in a culture that is obsessed with the fear of failure. We are paralyzed by the thought of making a mistake or losing what we have built.
So true.
But the legacy of Abacab proves something far more insidious. It proves that the absolute most dangerous threat to a creative mind, a business, or an individual life isn't failure. The most dangerous thing in the world is the comfort of your own past success.
Because success tells you that if the tambourine made you money yesterday, you better not put it down today.
Precisely. Success is the voice that tells you to stop experimenting. So I want to leave you with this final provocative thought to chew on long after this deep dive ends.
Okay, let's hear it.
Imagine you are forced to walk into your own version of the farmhouse tomorrow. You are locked in, and you are mandated to ban your own cliches. If you had to ruthlessly cut out every single safety net, every reliable trick, and every comfortable habit you've built your identity around, what would actually be left?
Wow.
If you stripped it all away, what is your Abacab?
It is a terrifying question to ask yourself. But as three guys in a Surrey cowshed proved, it might be the only way to find out what you are truly capable of building next. Thank you for joining us on this deep dive. Until next time, keep questioning your own blueprints.